The storm had teeth that night. Not the gentle kind that paints windows white, but the kind that hunts biting through fur, slicing through breath, turning bone into ice. The kind that reminds you the North does not care how many winters you've survived. It always wants to take one more. I had been walking for hours, hood drawn low, pack strapped tight, every step sinking into snow that swallowed sound and hope together. The forest was a white void, the path gone, the world reduced to sky, storm, and breath. I should have been afraid. But when you've already lost everything worth fearing for, the wind is just another voice trying to tear you apart. My name is Mira, exiled herbalist, Omega-born, once pack, now nothing. I was looking for frostroot, the only herb that still bloomed under snow when I saw the trail. Drops of blood frozen black against the white. Too much blood for prey. Too deep a drag for anything smaller than I followed it. Not because I should have, but because I couldn't not. The trail led through a ravine, where the wind screamed like something trapped beneath the ice. And there, half buried in snow, was the body. A wolf. No, a giant of one. Coal-black fur matted with blood, muscles built for war, claws dulled by exhaustion instead of age. His breath came slow, uneven, fogging the air in faint bursts. His flank rose barely, but it rose. He was alive. My heart stuttered. Wolves this size didn't come from common bloodlines. This was no wanderer, no starving loner. Something had tried to kill him, and almost succeeded. I stared at him for what felt like an hour. The smart thing was to walk away. Leave him. Let the storm finish what his enemy started. A lone Omega saving a dying Alpha, that was a story that ended with my throat torn out, and if the wolves didn't kill me, fate would. I had already been exiled for saving the wrong life. Healing the wrong body. Interfering with death was how I lost. Everything the first time. I told myself to turn back. I told myself I owed the world nothing. But I am not just an exile, I am a healer. And healers answer to something older than law. I moved. It took everything I had just to roll him onto his side. Blood soaked my gloves. Still warm, still fighting. His wound was vicious, a gash from shoulder to ribs, torn open by claw or steel. I pressed my hand to it, and he growled in his sleep weak, but warning. I know, I whispered through chattering teeth. Hate me later. Live first. My cloak was thick, wool and leather. Lined the only good thing I'd kept from my former life. I hated what I did next, but I did it anyway. I slid it off, knelt beside him, and wrapped it under his torso, tying the sleeves around his body like a rope harness. Then I stood. Braced. Pulled. His weight nearly dragged me down the slope with him. Every muscle in my back screamed. The wind clawed at my face. My boots slipped again and again. But I pulled. It took an hour to move him 20 paces. 2 to reach the tree line. 3 to reach the half-buried path that led back to my cabin. At one point, I slipped and fell into the snow, chest heaving, breath burning, arms shaking with fire. I could have left then. The storm would have buried him again. No one would know I failed. But I looked at him, this dying stranger, this beast of muscle and blood and cold, and I saw the same thing I saw in the mirror every winter. A life the world had already decided not to save. So, I got back up, pulled again. Step by step. Breath by breath. By the time I reached my door, my hands were numb. My body shaking so hard I could barely hold the latch. I dragged him inside, collapsed beside him, snow melting into puddles around us. The fire was low, but heat still lived in the stones. I pushed the door shut with my foot. Only then did I dare look at him closely. Up close, he was more scar than fur. Torn skin. Bite marks. Burned flesh. From something that wasn't natural. Whoever he'd fought hadn't just tried to kill him, they wanted him destroyed. I reached to touch his muzzle, to wipe the ice from his whiskers. That was when his eyes opened. Not the gold of a wild wolf, not the amber of a common alpha, silver, royal silver. My breath froze. Not a wolf, the kind sung about in northern war songs, the kind who commanded armies with a single howl, the kind who wore a crown without touching it. And I had just dragged him through the snow like a corpse. The old cabin wasn't much, 4 walls, a hearth, and a roof that leaked when the wind changed direction, but it was mine. More importantly, it was hidden. No scouts came this far. No patrols bothered with the woman the world had already declared dead. The forest had taken my old life, and I had learned to live inside the space it left behind. So when I dragged the black wolf across the threshold and kicked the door shut behind us, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. I didn't light the lamps. Light drew eyes. Eyes drew questions. Instead, I fed the fire until it burned steady and low, enough to thaw the blood frozen in his fur. He didn't move. Not even when I cut through the fabric of my cloak and peeled it from him in strips. Not when I washed the blood from his ribs. Not when my fingers pressed into the torn flesh to clean out shards of ice and gravel. I'd treated wolves before real wolves. Some wanted to live. Some didn't. This one wanted to. I could feel it in the pulse under my hand, a heartbeat like a war drum refusing to fall silent. "You're lucky," I muttered, rinsing another cloth. "If I'd found you even an hour later, I would have walked right past. I don't drag corpses home. Too messy." Still no answer, of course. Just slow breathing and the occasional twitch of muscle. Talking helped me think. Or maybe it reminded me I was still human. "You're huge, you know that?" I grumbled, checking his pulse again. "If you die, I'm not hauling you back out. I'll just bury you under the floorboards and pretend you were firewood." Nothing. Not a growl. Not a flick of the ear. Just that steady breath. That was when I noticed the markings. Not scars. Not burns. Symbols. Carved into his skin, precise, ancient, inked into flesh, the way only royal wolves were marked. One along the throat, another across the shoulder blade. A third on his spine, shaped like a crescent cleaved by a sword. Runes of the first bloodline. My stomach tightened. No one marked like this ever traveled alone. No one marked like this was ever allowed to bleed. "What in the gods' names are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer, but I swore his breathing changed, like he was listening. Like he understood every word I said. Ridiculous. I stitched the worst wound, wrapped his chest, and forced a bitter-smelling brew between his teeth. He swallowed, unconscious, but the body remembers what the mind forgets. "I don't know who left you to die," I said, sitting back on my heels. "But if they come looking, I hope they brought a shovel, because I'm not giving you up." The words surprised me when I heard them aloud. I had no pack anymore, no vow, no one to stand for. But the healer's code is older than any alpha's decree. If a life falls into your hands, you must decide whether it rises again or stays down. So I made my decision. "You live," I told him quietly, "or I bury you myself, no in between." The fire crackled. Outside, the storm beat against the walls like it wanted in. Inside, there was only breath. His. Mine. Time blurred. I dozed upright, back against the bed frame, head nodding forward. Then it happened. A sound deep, raw, wrong, bones moving, not shifting the way a wolf does. Shifting the way a body breaks and reforms. The wolf's spine arched, ribs snapping inward. Claws withdrew, nails splitting. His skull changed shape beneath the fur, jaw cracking, teeth grinding. I'd seen wolves shift before. Even alphas. But never like this. This wasn't instinct, this was will. Something ancient forcing its way back through flesh and blood. Fur tore. Bone reformed. The beast was becoming a man. I scrambled back, hand flying to the knife at my boot, pointless. But instinct doesn't ask logic's permission. The air filled with the sound of transformation, like branches breaking under snow. Then silence. Heavy. Final. Where the black wolf had been, a man now lay half covered in blood and my torn cloak. Broad shoulders scarred by war, muscles cut like stone, hair black as the pelt he'd worn, and the runes still there, now carved into human skin. But it was his eyes that froze me. Not the silver of a shifting wolf. The silver of a crowned one, a king's eyes. And they were open. Watching me. The first thing I noticed when the shift finished was not the blood. Not the runes. Not the quiet, terrifying power that clung to him even unconscious. It was the fact that there was now a very large, very naked man lying on my floor, And Mira, exile, healer of dying wolves and breaker of bad decisions, had dragged him into my home with my own hands. My first thought was not poetic. It was, oh no, absolutely not. This is how I end up dead, or mated, or both. I stumbled backward so hard I hit the wall, sending a bowl clattering to the floor. He didn't move, but I did, heart pounding like a trapped rabbit. The wolf had already been dangerous. The man? A different kind of danger entirely. He was built like the storm I found him in sharp lines, brutal strength, every inch carved from survival and war. Scars mapped his body like a forgotten language. Some healed, some fresh, one deep enough to have killed a lesser man. I forced my eyes up and instantly regretted it. His face was wrong for a dying man, too striking, too controlled even in unconsciousness. Like his body had forgotten how to look weak. He should have looked helpless. Instead, he looked like a fallen god, waiting to open his eyes and ruin someone's life. Mine, probably. I grabbed the nearest blanket, not for him, but for me, because apparently staring at the naked, almost corpse of a stranger was not on my healer's training list. I threw it over him anyway. My brain needed the distance. Then I did what any rational woman alone in the forest with a half-dead, rune-marked warrior would do. I checked the door latch, grabbed a knife, and sat as far away from him as possible, while pretending I wasn't staring. He didn't wake, not fully, but something inside him did. It started as a twitch in his fingers, then his jaw clenched, teeth grinding like he was biting down on steel. His breath quickened, turning ragged. A low growl, not human at all, rumbled in his chest. Nightmare. I'd tended to wounded soldiers before. I knew the signs. The body remembers the battlefield even when the mind can't bear it. His hand jerked upward like he was reaching for a weapon. Then the vision hit me, not in sight but in sound. A battlefield, screams, wolves howling. A roar someone's, the tearing sound of teeth ripping through flesh. He was reliving it. Hey, I said, voice low, steady like you speak to a wounded animal. You're not there. You're on the floor of a cabin. You're alive. Fight later. His breathing hitched, his nostrils flared. He smelled me. Even unconscious, he scented the air like instinct was calling him back. The growl deepened. Don't you dare shift again, I muttered. I don't have enough blankets for 2 bodies. Then it happened. Not the full shift, just the moment where nightmare and waking collide. His eyes snapped open, not silver flicker like before. Full, bright, blazing silver, the kind that doesn't belong to a man, but to a legend told in firelight and blood. And they were locked on me. The room stopped existing. Fire, wind, floor. All of it drowned beneath that stare. His voice came out raw, broken, but unmistakably dangerous. A growl shaped into words. My name. Mira. I froze. I had never told him my name. I had never spoken it aloud in this room. No one alive should know it, not here, not now. But he did. The man I dragged from the snow, the wolf whose life I pulled back from death, knew me. Not guessed, not scented, knew. The storm outside roared against the walls. Inside, something colder settled in my bones. I did not just save a stranger. I saved a man who already had a claim on my name. And kings, the kind with eyes like moons and runes like vows, didn't let go of what they claimed. When he finally spoke again, the voice that came out of him was no longer the broken growl of a half-shifted wolf. It was command, low, controlled, measured like a blade being unsheathed. Where am I? My heartbeat kicked, but I kept my voice steady. A cabin. Mine. You were dying. He pushed himself up on his elbows, and even injured, even pale, even weak, he moved like a man who'd never once asked permission to breathe. The blanket fell, exposing scars older than some kingdoms. His eyes swept the room, then landed on me. Not with gratitude, with suspicion sharpened into weaponry. How long? He asked. You've been unconscious for a day, maybe more. Who else is here? No one. What did you take? Nothing. Why did you save me? That was the moment I realized something important. He wasn't afraid he'd died. He was afraid someone else had won. I saved you, I repeated, because you were bleeding out in the snow. He stared like he was trying to decide if I was lying or just stupid. Then, like dropping a stone into water, he said, My name is Ares Valen, Alpha King of the 12 Realms. Silence hit the room like a blow. I didn't bow, didn't gasp, didn't fall to my knees and praise the moon. My first reaction? I blinked once and said, "Then whoever you angered really wanted you dead." He studied me, not like a man used to being questioned, but like one trying to calculate the threat of someone who didn't fear him. "You knew who I was," he said. "You hid me." "I dragged a half-frozen wolf out of a blizzard," I replied. "I didn't check for titles before stitching your ribs shut." He frowned like I'd spoken in a language he didn't like. "You expect me to believe you didn't recognize me?" "You were fur," I said flatly, "and half dead. Royal introductions aren't exactly part of the dying process." His jaw tightened. "You could have sold me," he said. "Held me, ransomed me, used me. And yet here you are." I gestured at the blanket, the stitched wounds, the fire I kept alive through the night. Alive, unchained, untied, breathing. "You're welcome." Instead of softening, his gaze sharpened. "People don't risk this much without wanting something." "I wanted you not to die on my path," I said. "That's it. No one saves a king for nothing." "I didn't save a king," I snapped. "I saved a wolf. A dying one. A crown doesn't change that." The air between us thickened. He was weakened. I could see it in the tremor of his arm, the way his breath shortened, but power wasn't always in strength. Sometimes, it was in the way a man looked at you and made you feel like the world had already chosen sides. I refused to let him decide mine. "You're in my home," I said, calm and sharp as winter glass. "You don't get to accuse me of crimes while wrapped in my only blanket." He leaned forward just enough to remind me what he used to be before the wounds. "What I am," he said, voice low, "does not change because I am injured." "I noticed," I replied. "It also didn't stop you from bleeding like everyone else." Something flickered in his eyes. Not respect, not yet, but awareness. Before either of us spoke again, he froze. His head lifted, scenting the air, then I heard it distant but unmistakable. Boots against snow. Multiple, fast, armed. Ares moved like a storm contained in flesh, even weak. He was already calculating, already deciding. "They tracked me," he said. "They? My guard, my court, or the ones who want me dead? Hard to tell." The footsteps grew louder. I stood, reaching for the nearest weapon, a kitchen blade. But steel is still steel. "Let me guess," I said. "They won't take my word that I'm not holding you hostage?" His eyes locked on mine. "No," he said. "They'll kill you first and ask the question after." That was the moment I understood. Saving a wolf was simple. Saving a king had a price I hadn't begun to pay. And the storm outside was no longer the most dangerous thing at my door. The first knock wasn't a knock at all. It was the door splitting. Wood shrieked, a crossbeam snapped, and winter came roaring into my cabin on a tide of steel and leather. Snow whirled through the opening like a flock of white birds. Then the birds grew faces, helmets, grim eyes. The king's sigil burned on their breastplates, a crescent split by a sword, glinting like ice. They didn't enter. They detonated. 3 men swept left toward the hearth, another 2 cut right to cover the small window, and the tallest, the one with the wolf-decorated pauldron, came straight for me. The move was a single breath. Blades up. Formation neat as calligraphy. Boots hitting my floorboards in a rhythm that said, "We train for this." My knife looked like a toy in my hand. "Hands where we can see them," someone barked, voice clipped with command. I lifted my palms, slow, fingers numb from more than the cold. 2 soldiers had already leveled long knives at my throat. Another shouldered his crossbow, the bolt fixed squarely on my heart. Their eyes did not see the little table with its bowls and herbs, the low shelf with my fever remedies, the stitched blankets. They saw a nobody Omega in a ruined doorway, with a naked man under a blanket and blood crawling across the floorboards. "By order of the crown," the pauldron one began. On the mattress, Ares tried to rise. He didn't make it to sitting before the room exploded again. "Down," a guard roared, and everything accelerated. One soldier lunged past the others, sword flashing. He was fast enough that the edge of his blade kissed my cheek before I even registered the movement. The cold of it shocked me more than the nick it left behind. "Stop!" I shouted, stepping between the bed and the steel. "He's wounded, he'll—" The sword tilted, hungry for a throat. Mine. And then the temperature in the room dropped into something that no fire could warm. "Touch her," Ares said, voice quiet as falling ash. "And I take your hands." No shout, no snarl, just a line drawn in the world. Everything paused. The sword that had been a breath from my skin stopped like it hit stone. Even the wind at the broken door seemed to check itself, as if the weather had manners around that voice. I looked back at him. He was half off the mattress, blanket sliding from his hips, the bandage at his ribs blooming red where the movement had torn my stitches. He should have looked helpless. He did not. He looked like a cliff, deciding whether to fall on a village. The guard who'd nearly cut me opened his mouth to object, then shut it when Ares turned his head the smallest degree. The movement bared the rune at his throat, black ink over old scar. Power moved through the room like the roll of distant thunder. The crossbowman swallowed. "Your Majesty?" the pauldron one asked carefully. And the two syllables knocked something loose in my head. He wasn't just a man on my floor anymore, not just the wolf I dragged from the snow. The title hit like a rung on a ladder I didn't know I'd been climbing. Ares Valen, Alpha King. The 12 realms knelt for this man. Armies broke on his name. I was standing between him and a ring of weapons with an herb knife and a heartbeat. "You were missing 5 days," Ares said without looking at the captain, eyes still on the blade near my throat. "And this is the competence you bring to me?" "My king," the captain answered, recovering his command like a cloak. "We tracked your blood to this cabin. Our duty is not to kill my healer." He said it without glancing at me. He called me something I hadn't been in years. It should have meant nothing. It meant everything. The guard's sword lowered by a finger width, then another. The crossbowman regrouped first. "Sire, we were told you were taken," he tried again. "That a rebel Omega dragged me out of a blizzard." Ares said, flat. "She did not bind me. She did not ransom me. She did not alert your incompetence sooner only because you were not here." The wind pushed harder through the shattered frame, pelting the floor with snow. Someone nudged the door half-closed with a boot, never taking eyes off me. I could feel my own pulse beating in the nick the sword had left, each throb a dot of heat in the cold. The captain recovered enough to scowl at me. "Step away from His Majesty," he commanded. "No," I said, surprising us both. His eyebrows jerked. The point of the nearest blade climbed again on instinct before Ares's voice slid across the room. "Lower it, Tor," he told the soldier. Not a request, a verdict. The weapon dipped. The cabin breathed. The captain Tor shifted to the practical. He gestured to 2 of the soldiers. "Secure the perimeter. Check the tree line, the ravine, anywhere a watcher could sit. If there's a scent we missed, I want it." They moved instantly, bundling the wind back inside with their bodies as they stepped out to scan the white world. 2 others approached with heavy cloaks, not for me, but for the man on my mattress. The instinct to ward them off was stupid and immediate. My hand came up before I could stop it. One flinched like I'd lifted a blade. "She hasn't harmed me," Ares said, eyes on that stupid traitorous hand of mine. "She will continue not to harm me." The nearest guard stiffened. "Your Majesty, if she was involved." "She wasn't." "How can we be certain?" Ares kept his eyes on mine until the silence turned into an answer, and something in my chest loosened in a way I did not permit. "You want certainty?" he asked his soldier without looking away. "I give you fact. If not for her, your king is a cooling corpse in a ravine." The words landed and stayed. Even the soldier who'd almost killed me had the decency to look at his boots. I couldn't decide which sensation unsettled me more, the guard's blade retreating from my throat, or the fact that a crown had put itself between me and it. He had defended me, not as a favor, not as a performance, as if the threat to me was the threat to his order of things. "Wrap him," I said when the moment broke, and the guards actually listened to me. I shook my head, gathering the torn ends of my wits. "Not too tight, he'll tear the suture if you pull like that, and someone close that door if you want his fever to break." They moved. Not fast, not obedient to me, but the cabin shifted on its axis. One guard slammed the broken door into a half-shut brace. Another unrolled a traveling cloak over Ares's hips with a soldier's efficiency and a pilgrim's care. The crossbow lowered to the floor, set safely out of play. I touched the bandage at Ares's ribs and felt the shiver that cut under his breath. He hid it well enough that only a healer's hand would find it. The old knowledge slid back into me like a remembered song. The heat of infection. The fine tremor that means a wound is deeper than it looks. The way wolves try to hide pain as if someone is always watching. "Your Majesty," the captain said, straighter now that the ritual words had been spoken. "Shall I call the physician from the city?" "No." Ares's answer was instant, unarguable. His gaze cut to me and away again. "She will do. She will do." My mouth was suddenly too dry for the retort it deserved. A man like him didn't praise, he assigned. Still, praise is not the only way a command can feel like protection. The last two soldiers, those who had not yet found a reason to mistrust me, stepped back, squared their shoulders, and did something I did not expect. They knelt. The movement rolled through the room like a tide going out. One knee, then the other. Blue cloaks pooling against the thawing boards. Their heads bowed, fists over hearts. The world tightened in on that posture, the way the air tightens. Around a struck bell. "Your Majesty," they chorused, voices low, reverent. "We are at your command." Snow hissed in the hearth. My breath fogged and disappeared. I had seen wolves kneel to alphas before. I had knelt, once. Not like this. It wasn't the ceremony that froze me. It was the reality underneath it. The storm-stained man on my mattress was not a rumor now, not the figure the North used to frighten pups into obedience. He was a fact. Ares Valen, Alpha King, the 12 realms bent for him. And I stood at the edge of my cheap rug with blood on my hands and a nick on my throat, realizing I had dragged a crown across a blizzard and into my life. I did not bow. I did not run. I simply watched the men who had come to kill me bend their knees to the man who had stopped them, and the shock held me where I was caught between a ruined door and a king's name, breath frost white in the quiet that followed. They made camp by sunset, the king's banner cutting a black mark against the snow. It wasn't a banner of victory this time, but of return. The scent of horses, steel, and politics hung heavier than smoke. Everywhere I looked, the royal insignia gleamed, wolf sigils stamped on armor, carriages draped in velvet, men who looked at me like I'd crawled out of a gutter that had offended them personally. And maybe I had. I wasn't meant to be here, not walking among gold tents and polished boots, not after dragging a half-dead wolf through a storm. The nobles arrived before we even stopped moving. Voices already raised, eyes already aimed at me. I'd seen that look before, the kind that measures your worth in dirt, the kind that decides your guilt before asking for your name. She touched him. She laid hands on His Majesty. No permission, no escort, no right. The words fell like stones. Ares sat silent on his horse, cloak drawn across his shoulders, face unreadable. He looked better than he had the day before, stronger, upright, human again. But there was something in his posture that said he was listening not to them, but to the space between their words. The quiet where truth hides. A woman in fine furs stepped forward. She smelled of lilies and venom. "Sire, this, Omega," she said the word like spitting poison, "handled you in your vulnerable state. For the dignity of the crown, she must be disciplined." Disciplined. That word always meant the same thing in noble tongues, punishment dressed in etiquette. I didn't flinch. Not outwardly. My hands were still bandaged from dragging his weight through the snow, my knees still bruised, but pride was the only thing I had left to keep me upright. "She saved my life," Ares said. The murmur stopped instantly, sliced clean by that voice. He didn't raise it, didn't snarl or roar. He just spoke, and men accustomed to command went silent because that tone belonged to no equal. The woman in furs blinked, recovering. "Of course, Your Majesty." Yet such familiarity. She dragged me out of a blizzard with her bare hands. His gaze shifted toward me, slow, deliberate. "When my own men couldn't find me, when your horses turned back." Someone gasped. Someone else shifted uneasily. I wanted to disappear into the snow, but he didn't stop. "She stays under royal protection. She rides beside me." That was it. No explanation. No compromise. A decree. The woman bowed too low to be respectful, too slow to be sincere, and retreated. The others followed, whispering under their breath. They didn't dare argue, not to his face, but their glances cut sharper than any knife. A king's protection was a gift, it was also a prison. The moment he turned away, a soldier seized my arm. "You heard His Majesty," he said gruffly. "You're in the royal convoy now." I didn't argue, but I didn't thank him either. His grip was rough, but his confusion worse. He didn't know if he was guarding me or escorting me, and neither did I. They placed me at the front of the second carriage, beside the royal healer and two soldiers who refused to meet my eyes. The air smelled of damp leather and melted snow. I watched the king's silhouette ahead of us, cloaked in silver fur and authority. He looked as untouchable as the mountains themselves. But then the wind shifted, and something strange happened. The horses jerked. The wolves pulling the supply sleds started to growl, restless. The guards whispered something about the king's wolf being unsettled. I felt it too. The air itself vibrated, a soundless hum crawling under my skin. It wasn't the pack. It wasn't the men. It was him. Ares turned slightly in his saddle, eyes finding me through the snow, and I saw the flicker behind his pupils, the faint silver that meant his wolf was pressing against his control. The tension in his shoulders eased only when our eyes met. The growling stopped. The air softened. The realization struck me like a spark catching dry grass. The king's wolf calmed only when I was near. I looked away first. The convoy moved again. Snow crushed under hooves and wheels, the forest echoing the sound of order restored. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something binding and invisible. By the time night fell, the camp had formed its perfect circle again, tents around the fire, guards around the king, me at the edge of both. I tried to sleep, but the wind kept pulling at the flap of my tent, whispering things I didn't want to hear, the kind that sounded like fate and debt. He came to me just before dawn. I didn't hear him arrive. I only felt the air change. A weight, a presence. The fire outside flickered, casting his shadow across the fabric of the tent. "You shouldn't walk alone at night," he said. I looked up. He stood at the entrance, the crownless king, the snow melting from his boots. "I wasn't," I said. "The guards won't stop," staring. "They'll stop when I tell them to, and if I tell them myself?" A hint of a smirk ghosted his lips. "They don't answer to you, then maybe I should go back to the forest. Less noise there." His gaze darkened, not angry, just sharp enough to slice through the thought before it grew into rebellion. "You dragged me from death, Mira," he said, voice quiet but carrying that same dangerous certainty as before. "Now you don't get to walk away." My breath caught. He said it like a vow, not a threat. Outside, the wolves howled once, then fell silent. And I realized, in saving him, I had stepped into a bond that neither of us fully understood. Half rescued, half imprisoned, and maybe both fates were the same thing. The capital rose out of the snow like a story I didn't belong in. High walls of white stone, towers shaped like spears pointing at the moon, banners snapping in the wind, black wolf over silver sky. The kind of place built not for comfort, but for awe. A kingdom that wanted the world to remember who ruled it. But as the convoy rolled through the gates, the awe wasn't for the king, it was for me. Not admiration, not reverence, but the kind of stairwolves reserved for something that shouldn't exist in their territory. Whispers followed me the way frost follows shadow. "Who is she?" "She's the one who touched him. No rank. No house. Not even marked. A nobody Omega." And she laid hands on the king's body. It didn't matter that I saved him, it mattered that they hadn't. Ares rode at the front, calm as carved stone, but the court's voices trailed him like knives. They bowed, but not to honor, to maintain position, to hide the fact that half of them were already calculating how to use his return, and the other half how to get rid of the woman who dragged him back. Because kings don't just vanish, kings are removed. And the moment I set foot inside the capital gates, I understood why the nobles had looked at Ares like a ghost returned. His disappearance hadn't been an accident, it was a failed assassination, and I was the one who ruined it, which made me not just inconvenient, not just unwanted, a problem. The palace was worse than the walls. Hand-painted ceilings, velvet curtains, floors so polished they reflected the sky, everything made to display power. Everything designed to make someone like me feel like dirt on the marble. They escorted Ares to the throne room, but me? I was dragged in the opposite direction by attendants who spoke to me like I was poison they weren't allowed to spill. A woman in silver robes blocked our path. Regal. Sharp-eyed. Beautiful in the way winter is beautiful right before it kills you. The Queen Mother. Her smile was practiced. The kind you paint before you bury something. So, she said softly, circling me like I'd been placed on display. This is the girl who claims to have saved my son. I didn't claim. Silence. It wasn't a shout, it was worse. The kind of quiet command that had been obeyed for decades. She leaned closer, voice sweet as frozen honey. Tell me, child, how much coin did you think his corpse would fetch? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words. Oh, I had plenty, but because I suddenly understood the rules. In the wild, wolves kill you for food. In the court, they kill you for being inconvenient. You touched the crown without permission, she continued. And now the court stinks with the scandal of it. If you were smart, you would ask for a quick death. I thought of the wolf in the snow, the blood, the storm, the man who warned his soldiers away from me with a single sentence. I didn't touch the crown, I said. I saved a dying man. She flinched, not visibly, not to the untrained eye. But I saw it, the crack in the certainty. That was all the victory I needed. Her smile returned, colder. No, one will believe that. Before she could say more, the great doors opened, cold air, and a familiar scent rolling in behind it. Ares. Still in travel leathers, still bandaged, still bleeding through his shirt, but walking like the world moved around him, not the other way around. Mother, he said. No bow, no warmth. Step away from her. Her expression flickered, a queen's fury wrapped in grace. You bring a stranger into the palace and expect no questions? She is not a stranger. His gaze didn't leave mine. She is the reason I am alive. She is an omega. She is a healer. She is a risk. She is under my protection. That ended it. Not the argument that would continue in silence, in venom, in midnight whispers behind silk screens, but the moment. The Queen Mother withdrew, smile still carved on her face, but her eyes said what her voice didn't. You won't live long. Guards approached, waiting for the command to take me. Away to the servants' wing, the dungeon, the execution block, depending which noble won the debate around the table. Instead, Ares gave a different order. Mira sleeps in my chambers. The room reacted like he'd shattered glass. A noble choked on his own breath. A servant dropped a tray. Even the guards hesitated, because protecting the king was one thing, protecting the woman in his room was another. The Queen Mother's voice was silk and murder. You would bring an unmarked omega into the royal wing? Yes, Ares said. Into your private chambers? Yes. Why? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't justify. He simply spoke truth as decree. Because someone in this palace wants me dead, and she is the only one who didn't try. No one breathed. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The weight of his words sat in my chest like a second heartbeat. I wasn't just the healer who saved him anymore. I was the witness who ruined an assassination. A living threat to every hand that had held the blade. And now I was being escorted into the most protected room in the kingdom. Not as a guest. Not as a prisoner. As the one person the Alpha King refused to let out of his sight. The royal chambers were not a room. They were a world. High windows veiled in moonlight. Fire dancing in a hearth big enough to burn a tree. Curtains thick as winter cloaks. Carpets soft as snow that never melted. Every piece of furniture carved, gilded, meant to honor the man who slept here. But none of it matched the most startling truth. There was only one bed. And I was in his room. The guards stood outside the door. Not one inside. That was the king's rule. Privacy was his shield, not walls. Which meant it was just us. Ares sat on the edge of the mattress. Shirt discarded. Chest bare. Breath tight. I knelt in front of him with my herbs and needle, heat gathering under my ribs every time his eyes lingered too long. In daylight, he was imposing. In dim firelight, He was unbearably human. The bandages were soaked again. The wound that should have killed him still burned angry and red. But it wasn't the gash that drew my eye. It was the scar above it. Older. Deeper. A slash that began near his heart and dragged downward like someone had tried to carve the life out of him long before the snow. That one, I said quietly. It didn't come from a battle. His gaze flicked to mine. No. I waited. When he finally spoke, the answer was not what I expected. It came from someone who thought a king bleeds differently than a man. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. I understood. Power didn't make you safe. It made you valuable. I cleaned the wound in silence. His jaw tightened each time the cloth passed over raw flesh, but he didn't flinch. Not once. His pain lived behind stone, layered and controlled, same as everything else he let the world see. You're quiet tonight, he said. I'm trying. Not to stab you, I said. You keep shifting every time I touch you. The corner of his mouth curved almost a smile, but not quite. You treat me like a patient. You are a patient. Everyone else treats me like a throne. That silenced me more than any order ever could. The words were soft. Unarmored. Almost accidental. No one sees me, he continued, voice low. Not unless they want something from the crown. Loyalty, favor, fear, territory, war. And what do you want? I asked. His eyes found mine silver, but not cold. To be allowed to breathe. Something in my chest cracked. I didn't speak for a moment. I didn't trust my voice with the shape of whatever I was feeling, so I said the only truth I had left inside me. I saved you, I said, because no one ever saved me, and I was tired of watching things die when they didn't have to. The room shifted. Not in sound and weight. He didn't thank me. Not in words. Instead, he reached out slow, cautious, like he wasn't sure I wouldn't pull away, and rested his hand around my wrist. Warm, heavy, not possessive, not commanding, just there. I haven't slept, he murmured, eyes lowering, since before the attempt. I didn't understand at first. Then I realized he meant it literally. A king who ruled armies, a wolf who could break men in half, a legend. Afraid to sleep. I didn't tell him it was fine. I didn't offer comfort or promises. I just stayed where I was, breathing in the quiet with him. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. And slowly, his grip loosened, his forehead tipped forward, and the weight of his body leaned toward mine. Not collapsing. Surrendering. He fell asleep like that hand still wrapped around my wrist, head bowed, breath steady for the first time since I'd met him. The mighty Alpha King slept like a man who'd finally found ground that didn't shift under him. And I sat there, pulse, rattling my ribs, realizing I had just become something far more dangerous than a healer, a place he could rest. I don't know how long I stayed like that, motionless, afraid to wake him, afraid to understand what this connection was turning into, but the fire had burned down to embers before I moved. I eased his hand gently from mine, laid him against the pillows, drew the blanket up to his chest. When I turned toward the door, a gust of cold air slipped under it. Not natural cold, uninvited cold. A shift in pressure, a silence too sharp. I crossed the room and placed my ear to the wood. Footsteps. Too light for guards. Too many for servants. The wards around the chamber flickered invisible but felt like a heartbeat skipping. Someone had breached the palace defenses. Again. This time, not to drag the king into the snow. This time, to finish what the assassin failed to do. Dawn crept into the palace the way lies do, quiet, soft, pretending it meant no harm. I hadn't slept. Not after hearing the footsteps in the night. Not after feeling the air thicken with a threat no one else seemed to notice. I stayed in the king's chamber, sitting in the chair near the fire, watching flames turn to ash, while Ares slept deeper than I'd ever seen him sleep. He looked young in rest. Not harmless, he could never be that, but unguarded. The kind of unguarded no king allows in daylight. I was still watching him when the light hit the marble. That was when I saw it. Not light. Metal. A glint from the balcony rail too small for a blade, too thin for a spear, a dart, time broke in half, There was no warning, no shout, no chance to think. Instinct moved before thought, the way a body flinches from fire before the mind names heat. I threw myself forward, not away from the danger into it. Between king and weapon, between death and the man I dragged out of snow. The dart pierced flesh. Not his. Mine. A cold bloom in my shoulder, then a burn that spread like wildfire under the skin. My breath caught in a gasp, and the world tilted. Ares was on his feet before my body hit the floor. His eyes found the dart first. Then the wound. Then me. Everything inside him snapped. Who? The word never finished. His control broke before his voice did. I had seen him angry. I had not seen him unbound. His wolf came forward like a storm tearing through bone. Not a shift of muscle and fur, an eruption. Bones split, skin tore. The man vanished inside the beast that had ruled battlefields and broken armies. What stood in the king's place was not a wolf. It was something too large, too ancient, too furious to be named. And it roared. The balcony shattered. 2 assassins were dragged across the railing before they had time to scream. One was crushed against the wall, bones snapping like twigs. The other had his throat torn out before his feet left the marble. More poured in through the second entrance, hooded, masked, blades, aiming for the king's heart. They didn't make it 2 steps. Fur and fury met them. Steel flew. Blood hit the pillars in streaks, and the court nobles, guards, servants frozen in the halls outside witnessed the truth their songs always softened. The king was not feared because he ruled wolves. He was feared because he was one. Not a man, a force. But none of that felt real to me. All I could feel was the poison flooding my veins, cold lightning, numbing my arm, sinking into my lungs with every breath. Someone was shouting, "Fetch the healer. She's marked, she matters to him. There's no time, look at her skin." Hands touched me, voices shook, but sound drifted away like it was being pulled down a well. Ares returned. Not as wolf, not fully man. Something between. Chest heaving, fur half shifted, blood dripping from his claws. Eyes wild in mine at the same time. When he saw me, really saw me, the rage evaporated into something far worse. Fear. He dropped to the floor beside me, hands shaking as they hovered over the wound, afraid to touch, afraid not to. Mira. His voice splintered. Stay with me. Look at me. I tried. Gods, I tried. But my body felt distant. Like it wasn't mine anymore. My fingers went numb. My vision blurred. The marble beneath me had the cold of the blizzard all over again. Ares. I whispered. His hands caught my face. No. Don't. Don't close your eyes. I wanted to tell him I wasn't closing them. I was being pulled under. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was silver, his silver bright and helpless for the first time since I'd known him. And the last thing I heard was something no one in the 12 realms would believe if I lived long enough to repeat it. The Alpha King begging. Don't leave me. There are different kinds of darkness, the kind you close your eyes and enter willingly. The kind that steals you without asking, and the kind that feels like a hand pulling you backward through your own pulse. That was the darkness I fell into. It wasn't sleep. It wasn't death. It was suspension. A place with no sound, no breath, no body. Just the echo of my heartbeat slowing, then fading, then nothing, until something burned its way through it. Heat, alive, feral, not mine, his. I didn't wake to a room. I woke to a mouth against mine, hot and fierce, forcing breath into lungs that had already surrendered. Then pain. Liquid fire on my tongue, metal and storm and alpha power, pouring down my throat like a command my blood could not refuse. I gasped because I could breathe again. I choked because it wasn't my breath I was breathing. I woke because he would not let me die. When my eyes opened, he was there. Ares. Kneeling over me, a streak of my blood still across his jaw, the taste of his still on my lips. You... My voice was a rasp. What did you do? The look in his eyes was not apology. It was possession edged in desperation. I broke the law, he said, and the room reeled with the weight of it. Alpha blood was sacred. Royal alpha blood was untouchable. Mixing it with someone else's was forbidden for one reason. It was a bond, not a healing, a claim. You gave me your blood, I whispered. I will not bury another life that saved mine. His voice didn't shake. Mine did. You've marked me. I've kept you alive. You've bound us. I've chosen you. There it was. Not romance, not softness, a declaration carved in truth. I tried to sit up. The room tilted. My veins felt like they were too small to hold what now lived inside them. My wolf quiet for years stirred under my skin, restless and startled. It knew him. My pulse synced to his, my breath followed his. And the scent gods his scent clung to me, not faint, not subtle, claiming, I wasn't just alive, I was marked. His blood in mine, his scent on me. His bond, stamped into the place where my old life used to be. You can't undo this, I said, barely more than breath. I wouldn't if I could. I stared at him. At the man kings feared and armies followed. At the wolf who tore assassins apart when I fell. At the ruler who broke a law carved into dynasty just to keep me breathing. You've made me yours, I said. He didn't deny it. You were never anyone's, he said softly. That's why you survived. That's why I couldn't let you go. My throat tightened, not from poison. From the terrifying, undeniable truth of him. Before I could answer, before I could decide if I was furious or undone, or both, the doors burst open. Councilmen, nobles, advisors, guards, half the court, crowding the threshold like something holy or horrifying had been unleashed. They smelled it before they saw it. Royal blood. On my skin. In my veins. One man gagged. Another crossed himself. The Queen Mother didn't gasp. She smiled, slow and vicious. She carries the king's blood. Someone whispered. She carries his scent. She carries his claim. It's illegal, a councilman snapped. An Omega bearing the Alpha's blood bond is a threat to the throne. She's usurped the line. She's bewitched him. She must be executed, or exiled beyond the border. I didn't flinch, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I finally understood. I wasn't prey anymore. I was evidence. Evidence of who tried to kill him. Evidence of who he trusted instead. Evidence that the throne was no longer untouchable. Ares rose to his full height. Blood on his hands, fire in his eyes. She lives, he said, voice deadly, and anyone who tries to change that will answer to me. The room shook with silence. But then the verdict came. Your Majesty, the High Counselor declared. The bond you forged is forbidden by law. The punishment is clear. He didn't look at Ares. He looked at me. Execution or exile? The Moon Court was not a place for justice. It was a place for spectacle. Marble polished until it held reflections. A ceiling painted with the 12 phases of the lunar cycle. Thrones raised high so the council could look down at the accused. Tonight the accused was me. I stood in the center of the tribunal ring, surrounded by the highest bloodlines in the realm, every gaze sharpened like a blade. I could feel their judgment before a word was spoken. Omega, healer, outsider, contaminated with royal blood. The charges were read aloud in a voice that echoed off the stone. Treason by unlawful bond. Defilement of the crown's sanctity. Manipulation of the king through blood binding. Bewitching the Alpha of the 12 realms. The last line stung more than the rest, not because it was cruel, but because it was lazy. A woman couldn't simply matter. She had to be witchcraft. The crowd hissed. Some spat. More than one noble made the sign of warding, as if my presence rewrote the laws of nature. I said nothing, not because I was silent, but because I was watching him. Ares sat on the throne, crown catching the moonlight, expression carved from winter, unmoving, unreadable. They thought that meant I stood alone. They were wrong. The High Counselor lifted his staff. The Moon Court calls for testimony. Speak now, Your Majesty. Was this bond formed by force, deception, or seduction? The implication hung in the air like smoke. Ares stood. The room fell silent. Every noble leaned forward. Every guard tensed. He walked down the steps of the dais, slow, deliberate, the weight of a kingdom behind each step. When he reached the center, he didn't stand beside me. He stood before me. He lifted his hands and removed the crown. Gasps cracked through the court like breaking ice. No king removed his crown inside the tribunal, not unless he meant to speak as man, instead of monarch. Then he did something that shattered every law written in blood and stone. He knelt. The king, the Alpha, the moon's wrath knelt before me. My life was not saved by magic, he said, voice ringing like steel. It was saved by a woman who owed me nothing. Not name, not loyalty, not blood. The Queen Mother rose, shaking with fury. A king does not kneel. He does, Ares said, when the world stands too high to see the truth. Every eye was on him now. She saved my life, he continued. She saved my throne, and now my soul. He looked up at me then, not as a king, as the man I'd dragged from a storm. If she dies, he said, the crown dies with her. Gasps. Shouts. Someone fainted. The court fractured into chaos, half enraged, half afraid, all stunned. An alpha king kneeling wasn't just shocking, it was history tearing itself open. No law, Ares said, standing now, voice dark as storm, can, his sentence, the one the crown itself owes its life to. It should have ended there. But the moon court never ends where it should. Because while the nobles argued, while the council sputtered, while the Queen Mother tried to reclaim order, someone else spoke. A slow clap echoed through the chamber. From the far end of the hall, a man stepped forward, tall, elegant, untouched by panic, eyes cold as broken glass. Ares stiffened. His cousin, Lord Soren Valen. He bowed not in respect, but in mockery. Impressive speech, cousin, he said, but you forgot to mention the part where you were never meant to return. The room stilled, because everyone heard what he didn't say. He was confessing. I gave the order in the snow. Soren continued, voice smooth. The poison on the dart, the hunters who followed. The storm should have finished what I started. My breath left me. The wolf in the snow. The wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The dart meant for the king, that landed in me. It had all been him. You wanted the throne, Ares said, voice low enough to be lethal. I wanted a king who wouldn't kneel to an Omega nobody. Soren replied. The court erupted. Nobles screamed. Guards moved. The Queen Mother cried out in horror, but I didn't hear them. Because Ares didn't look at Soren. He looked at me. Like every choice he'd ever made, had been sharpened to this moment. And I knew. This wasn't the end of the trial. It was the beginning of the war. Justice was not loud when it finally arrived. It wasn't swords. It wasn't fire. It wasn't even blood, though enough of it had already been spilled. Justice came in the form of a single sentence spoken under the last full moon of winter. Soren Valen is stripped of title, land, and lineage, and cast beyond the borders of the 12 realms. No execution. No spectacle. Just exile, the fate he'd wished on me. The court watched in stunned silence as the man who had once been next in line to rule was dragged from the moon court in chains. His last look wasn't at Ares, it was at me. The Omega who ruined the perfect assassination, the healer who dragged a king back to life, the girl who, by existing, proved his entire game had failed. When the doors shut behind him, the whole hall seemed to breathe not relief, but recognition. The story had changed, not because I had power, but because I had survived it. By the time the tribunal ended, the snow outside the palace had begun to soften. Spring was not here yet, but winter was breaking, the same way a fever breaks when the body finally decides to live. I stood on the balcony of the king's chambers, watching the thaw. Water ran in thin silver streams across the stone, and the trees, once locked in ice, now bent under the weight of melting frost. Behind me, I heard footsteps. No armor, no guards, just him. Ares stepped beside me, cloak unfastened, shirt open at the collar. No crown, no throne. Just the man who had once been a dying wolf in my arms. It's over, I said. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, for everyone else. Not for us. I turned. His eyes, silver, steady, unbearably open, held something I had never seen from a king: uncertainty. "What happens now?" I asked. He didn't speak right away. He looked out over the courtyard, where the snow was breaking, where the world was beginning again, and then he said, "I won't cage you, not with duty, not with bond. You saved my life, but that does not mean you owe it to me." Then he looked at me fully. "Stay as queen," he said, "or walk away as free as the snow you came from." My heart didn't lurch. It didn't break. It settled. Because I finally understood what he was offering. Not a crown, not a title, not even a future. A choice. A thing I had never been given. Not by my pack. Not by exile. Not by fate. I took one step toward him, then another, until we were close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath, the quiet of his pulse, the truth of the bond that tied us long before blood ever did. "I didn't drag a dying wolf through a blizzard," I said, "just to watch him walk away." The line landed between us, like the final piece of a story we had both been writing without knowing it. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply reached out slowly, as though asking permission instead of assuming it, and let his forehead rest against mine. The bond wasn't fire. It wasn't lightning. It was gravity. Not pulling us down, pulling us home. Later, when the moon lifted over the courtyard, he shifted, not the brutal shift of battle, not the desperate shift of survival, but the kind a wolf makes when the world is finally safe enough to breathe. The great black wolf I pulled from the snow stood beside me again. No blood on his fur, no wound in his side, no crown between us. I shifted too, for the first time in years, without pain, without fear. My wolf brushed against his, tail flicking his flank, and instead of dominance, there was something else. Equal. He didn't run ahead. He didn't wait behind. He ran with me. Through the thawing world, paws hitting softening earth, snow water splashing under us, the last cold wind of winter breaking against our fur. Not Alpha and Omega, not king and exile. Just two wolves who had refused to die when the world asked them to.